Hi, I'm Kamali, taking you through some of the things people are talking about and some of the stuff they're sharing around the world on Newsfeed today. A global study of diversity reveals some in society becoming more equal, while some places are getting more divided.
This is a glorious tradition. You folks are part of it, and we can't have politicians trampling on it with impunity.
The White House Correspondents' dinner took place, and once again, Mr. President wasn't there. The second cyclone in a few weeks brings devastation and flooding to Mozambique. And the best cat up a tree story you're ever likely to see in Monday's Animals Doing Stuff. And top of our newsfeed, diversity around the world. The Pew Research Center has been looking at whether diversity and gender equality is on the rise. Researchers have polled more than 30,000 people in 27 countries, but they weren't just interested in diversity and gender equality. They also wanted to look at the part that religion plays in society. Here are some of the findings. People across North America, Europe and the Asia-Pacific believe that diversity has risen in their respective nations. It was found that young and educated people with liberal political leanings were more in favour of cultural diversity. There are, however, two exceptions, Greece and Italy. About 62% of Greeks oppose their country being a diverse one, and the same view is held by 45% of Italians. In many of the countries surveyed, people strongly favoured more gender equality. But men are more likely than women to say that gender equality has increased, as seen in Germany, the UK, South Korea and Kenya. People in North America and Australia say that religion plays a less important role today than it did 20 years ago. And Europeans are most sceptical about an increased role for religion. In some African countries, along with parts of South America, religion as part of society is seen as being more favourable. So what about family ties? Most countries agree they're weakening and say that it's a bad thing. But in Indonesia and the Philippines, people think family ties are strengthening and say it's a good thing. Oh, the annual cringe-inducing dinner of White House correspondents was held over the weekend, and in keeping with tradition, President Trump was not there. The current inhabitant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue avoids the event like the plague. He regularly accuses journalists of spreading fake news and calls them the enemy of the people, and as a result, the annual ritual of poking fun at the commander-in-chief has lost lots of its funny.
And I'd like to observe...
It had comedians upset. Michelle Wolf called the White House correspondents cowards. And Samantha Bee went as far as to host her own roasting of the president. But the president of the White House Correspondents Association was adamant there would be no comedian poking fun at Donald Trump at this year's dinner.
I don't want to dwell on the president. This is not his dinner, it is ours. And it should stay ours.
But presidential historian Ron Chernow might not have received the memo.
Now, it's nice to see such a healthy turnout tonight. As you all know, on Tuesday, the president let it be known that he wanted members of his administration to stay away from this dinner. And at first, I was puzzled by this news. But then I learned that a rumor was circulating in Washington that I was going to be reading aloud from the redacted portions of the Mueller report, and everything was explained.
But Chernow went even further than that.
My main theme here tonight is that relations between presidents and the press are inevitably tough, almost always adversarial, but they don't need to be steeped in venom.
Trump predictably didn't attend, and at his own campaign event in Wisconsin, trash-talked the media.
And remember this, if I make any misstatement, if I'm off by just a little tiny bit, those people back there will be headlines. So I have to be very careful. Fake news, they're fake. They are fake. They are fakers.
But back in Washington, Chernow said that people's roles had been reversed.
People are taking their comedians seriously and their politicians as a joke, and that certainly describes our topsy-turvy moment.
And that's nothing to laugh about.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the other things that caught our eye on social media. Now, Game of Thrones once again dominates all the top trends on Twitter, restricting the amount of interneting you can do on a Monday. It's the third installment of Season 8, and no spoilers, but it's a big one, called the Battle of Winterfell. A sweet Twitter thread from here in Turkey, #PetLoversClub. People have been sharing pictures of their parents or grandparents showing off a furry friend. And why? Because they can, because the internet exists. And Avengers Endgame is a record breaker, smashing the box office by raking in $1.2 billion. It's the first film to break $1 billion in its opening weekend. It's an incredible feat, but when you consider that some cinemas in London were only showing Avengers this week, you can see how it may have happened.
The world has changed.
Now, Cyclone Kenneth has swept through Mozambique just a few weeks after Cyclone Idai. It's brought even more rain and destruction. The storms have hit remote regions, so aid workers are struggling to provide support for those affected.
Indeed, it is really the first time in recorded history that two strong tropical cyclones have hit the country in the same season. At the moment, the rescue operations are still ongoing and the assessments are also determining the amount of damage caused. But the best estimates that we have right now is that indeed more than 35,000 homes have been destroyed. 5 health facilities, maternity wards, 75 classrooms, having an impact directly on about 180,000 people. About 90,000 of those are children, some of the most vulnerable, poorest children in the country. So teams, in fact, are already deployed, and the fact that the two cyclones hit so hard the same country in such a short period of time, maybe the one good thing was that a lot of teams were already on the ground, working still in the southern regions of Sofala compared to Cabo region now hit. So we had already a lot of people readily available on the ground, and indeed in advanced emergency teams on the ground from the different partners, including UNICEF. And we were able, therefore, also to ship, pre-position some of the most life-saving essential supplies already to the affected area as the cyclone was hitting. So the preparedness element really played, so to speak, in favor. But of course, the extent of the damage is humongous. We've been suffering, as many partners, from really a lack of resources, a lack of funding. The Idai cyclone, as the attention was moving away from Mozambique, the appeal that we had, the needs were only about 1/4 funded. And now Kenneth is really bringing an additional strain on the fundings and on the resources that are available on the ground, despite all the efforts to remobilize a lot of those resources to the Cabo province now.
And next, the number of people dying because of the long-running war in Afghanistan hit a high at the beginning of 2019. It's largely due to the increasingly lethal tactics being employed by the Afghan army, backed by the United States. All right, let's spin around the world now for some other stories you need to know this Monday. Now, 2 weeks after the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka, the government there wants to ban face coverings of all kinds. It says the ban on niqabs, burqas and any clothing that obscures a person's face is necessary on security grounds. The New York Times has issued an apology after publishing a cartoon described as anti-Semitic. We aren't showing the image, but it depicts a blind Donald Trump leading the Israeli Prime Minister, portrayed as a guide dog on a leash. Now, after widespread criticism, the Times has acknowledged the cartoon was offensive and says it was an error in judgment. A confusing story from Italy now. The organisers of the Trieste half marathon have backtracked on their decision to ban African athletes. The event's manager says he'd hoped to highlight the exploitation of black runners by athletics organisations. But after he was accused of racism, he has retracted the ban and said they can compete. A picture of the body of the footballer Emiliano Sala has been posted online. The Argentinian died in a plane crash in January. His father died last week. UK police have opened an investigation into who posted the picture and who shared it. And Turkey's experiencing a Brexit bounce as people from the UK, uncertain about how the Brexit shambles will play out, have chosen to book holidays outside the EU, with Turkey a first choice for many. Now, people living in some US cities are battling with health problems as municipalities there are unable to properly dispose of household and industrial waste. Now, the problem of lead in the water in the city of Flint of Michigan is back in the headlines as 5 years on, people still don't trust the government. And a decision by China over recyclables is also exacerbating people's problems.
China is the world's biggest importer of plastic and electronic recyclables, and the United States is the biggest exporter. China would buy scrap items from other countries and then recycle much of it into raw materials. So when China banned most imports in January 2018, in an attempt to cut down on emissions that come from destroying and processing plastic, China stopped accepting virtually any recycled plastic and unsorted scrap paper from abroad and severely curbed imports of cardboard. The US found itself with a major problem on its hands. Not having adequate equipment to process the material themselves, US cities started to burn their recyclables, since they could no longer be shipped overseas. But this is creating a health hazard for the people living nearby. Toxic pollution now threatens largely Black and Latino communities who live near the sites. One example is Chester City in the state of Pennsylvania. Nearly 4 in 10 children there have asthma. The rate of ovarian cancer is 64% higher than the rest of the state, and lung cancer rates are 24% higher. Pennsylvania health officials say that burning plastic recycling spreads dioxins into the food chain. The World Health Organization says more than 90% of human exposure to the dioxins is from food, mainly through meat, dairy, fish, and shellfish. Dioxins can cause reproductive and developmental problems, damage the immune system, interfere with hormones, and cause cancer. China says it plans to end all imports of recyclable material by 2020, citing health concerns. So, the US is now looking for other customers and trying to invest in its own recycling processing centers. How will the US and other countries now look to manage their own trash in a responsible manner now that China has insisted it is no longer going to be the world's dumping grounds?
And last today, you know that cliche about firemen being so underused they are rescuing cats who are stuck up trees? Well, that happened for real in Canada, but it wasn't any ordinary cat. Now, this cougar had to be tranquilized to be taken out of the tree in Victoria. As you can see, it's huge. It's not clear why the big cat decided to climb the tree. It does sound like the start of a terrible joke. Why did the cougar climb the tree? Anyway, it's been taken for observation and will be released back into the wild as soon as it wakes from its drug-induced catnap. Will do from the Newsfeed team. Reach out to me with your questions, comments, complaints and suggestions. I'm at Kamali Melbourne. You'll find us 24/7 on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Follow, subscribe and add. See you again tomorrow.